And the lecture has started. Alright, so we'll say the poem together. First of all, is everybody ready? Should we stand for this? I think we should. In honor of Hamilton. Okay, everybody stand up, right? Come on, you'll enjoy it all the more. Now, everybody, hold hands. Hold hands. Well, okay, you don't have to hold hands then, right? But just everybody say the poem together, okay? Everybody ready? Ready? 1, 2. A quaternion is... Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. A quaternion is like a vector, but with a W. To construct one, we use an axis and angle. That's what we do. For rotations must be normal, or otherwise it's pure. So we normalise, divide by length, just to be sure. To invert a normal quaternion, we negate x, y, and z. Multiply quaternion, inverse quaternion, and it rotates, don't you see? Sorry, quaternion vector, inverse quaternion, it rotates. Yeah. God. A rotation of 0 radians is the same as 2 pi. To convert a quaternion to a matrix, we use the API. So here's a help to old Hamilton, your inventor it would appear, and to imaginary numbers, floating in the hypersphere. Poem piece. that's the Quaternion poem. So I wrote that poem. I wrote that poem about 4 years ago when we started to do quaternions, first of all, and everyone found quaternions really hard, so I had to find a way that everyone could get the nuts and bolts of quaternions very, you know, in a sort of a concise form, and this is the nuts and bolts of everything you need to know about quaternion rotations. We'll start at line 1 and we'll go through it line by line and explain it, and then we'll write some code to prove that all of this stuff actually works. Alright, so first of all, just with regard to Hamilton, Hamilton was the inventor of the quaternion in 1843. He was an Irish mathematician and he discovered this thing while he was researching complex numbers and hyperspheres and stuff like this. He discovered that you could rotate things using a quaternion rotation. And interestingly enough, this was a bit like Boolean logic. You know, Boole was another Irish mathematician from Cork, and you can go down to UCC, you know, where the ACM Collegiate takes place every year, and you can see Boole's papers in Cork. But Boolean logic was another thing which was kind of ignored, you know, for an awfully long time until the invention of computers back in the 1940s, digital computers, and then Boolean logic became really fundamental. That's why we teach it every first year computer science student learns about Boolean logic. So quaternions are kind of similar, and quaternions were sort of ignored up until the 1960s. And in the 1960s, there were some very serious problems which people were trying to solve with computers. And in fact, even computer games didn't really use quaternions until the 90s. They came up with all kinds of hacky and disgracefully error-prone solutions to do rotations in 3D until somebody came on this idea of the quaternion. But now the quaternion is absolutely fundamental to every single game engine, the Unreal Engine, every single physics engine, the Havoc engine, everything makes use of quaternions to implement the orientation of objects in 3D. Alright, so that's like a potted history of the quaternion. So we'll go through it line by line. So the first thing, quaternion is like a vector but with a W. In X and A, if you declare a quaternion, which you can just do using Q-U-A-T or N-I-O-N, you can go quaternion Q. Alright, equals new quaternion. Like that. What you get is something equivalent, or what looks like, you should take notes, right? You get something that kind of looks from the outside like a 4-dimensional vector. In other words, it has an X, Y, a Z component, and it also has a W component. So you can go Q.X, Q.Y, Q.Z, Q.W. Alright? Well, I'm going to give you a bit more of the background before we advance into the rest of the poem. The first thing to say is quaternions are used to represent the orientation of an object in 3D. So quaternion equals the orientation. So already we have a couple of little mathematical tools that we might use. And we'll take a look at them very briefly, but normally I'd spend about an hour on this because Paul's coming in, I'll do it very quickly. What might we use to represent what way a 3D object is orientated? And how are we going to store that? We already have a couple of different tools we could use. What could we use?
You could do the angle on the XY axis, and then the angle on the XZ axis.
Cool.
And then the angle on the YZ axis.
You could do that, right? And in fact, there's two ways to do that, right? There's using fixed angles. There's using fixed angles. In other words, saying this is always rotated around, or fixed axes, I should say, A, X, Y, Z. So we could basically store it as yaw, pitch, and roll around the X, around the Y, and around the Z. Okay? The other way we could do, a slight variation of that, is we could allow the axes to rotate with the object. So in other words, instead of always rotating around the X, Y, and Z axis, we could basically say the right vector, the up vector, and the look vector, which is the same kind of idea. And this is basically the right, the up, and the look. Alright, we could say basically rotate a certain amount around the right, rotate a certain amount around the look, and a certain amount around the up. Is that a good way? Or I mean, it's certainly one way, and in fact, a lot of software still makes use of similar kind of ideas, and you still need things like look vectors and up vectors and right vectors and stuff. Can anyone see any problems with using that approach, with either of those approaches? And there are a number of fairly fundamental reasons why that isn't always the best way to store the orientation of an object. Can you think of any reasons?
They're not detailed enough.
What's that?
They're not detailed enough.
Well, I mean, they're kind of detailed enough, really, if you think about it. If you basically say, you know, rotate this amount around the x-axis, rotate this amount around the y-axis, rotate this amount around the z-axis, that's about as detailed as you need to be. Or rotate this amount around your look vector, this amount, and you can hold the orientation of an object. You can say, if you take it sort of any kind of 3D shape, oh, that's your coffee. I don't want to take my tea because it's still in it. You know, you can say rotate like that, rotate like that, rotate like that. That's the orientation of the object. That's okay. It's as detailed as it needs to be. That's not the issue. I'll give you one example of where we might run into a problem. And I believe Quaternions address this problem. We'll write a little program just to prove it. Imagine we took 3 rotations, right? And imagine we represented it with, say, as... We'll pick one. Oh, you missed the poem. Sorry. There's a poem. We'll pick. Yeah, there it is. You got to write it down. We'll pick 2 rotations, right? Let's imagine we did yaw, pitch, and roll. Okay, yaw being rotation around the y-axis, and let's say we took yaw, pitch, and roll. Yaw, pitch, roll. Let's say I did a 180-degree yaw. So basically, whatever way I'm facing here, I'm now facing in this direction instead. So I flip around like that. Let's say we try to represent that using different rotations. So we didn't want to use yaw to do that. Could we do that using just pitch and roll? Or could we do it using something else?
Maybe pitch all the way around and then roll yourself to straight or something.
Of course, definitely. So if you pitch, right, so pitch basically is rotation around the x-axis. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of flip backwards and then...
Yeah, so exactly. So say we pitched, what would we need to pitch? We would need to pitch, so this is first of all yaw 180 degrees. Say we pitched instead, what would we need to pitch? We would need to pitch 180 degrees, and then we would need to roll 180 degrees, wouldn't we? Okay, very good. I'm impressed, right? That's good, Stephen. So say we had these 2 things here. These are basically equal rotations, aren't they? If you represented this as 3 different numbers, we'll say a 3D vector, and you went to check to see where 2 objects rotated in the same way, what would you get? They're not equal, sure they're not? And in fact, if you pick this, there are actually an infinite number of rotations which can generate any other rotation. For example, here's another one. Well, a sequence of rotations, you could go 180, 180 on the roll, and then that's the same as rotating by back to your start. You could go 180, 180, 180. And that's the same as a rotation of 180 yaw, isn't it? You do 3 yaws of 180 and you get to the same space. So anyway, the point is there are an infinite number of ways of representing any orientation. So that's one of the problems with this thing here, and that's comparing one orientation with another. Another issue that we have, what if I was kind of pointing at this thing over here, and then I wanted to rotate and I wanted to point up over here? And I didn't want to do that by just instantly changing from one to the other. I want to go step by step through all the different steps, using my time delta to suddenly point from here and then over a period of time end up pointing at something else. Does anybody know what that's called in computing?
Book navigation?
Yeah, it's actually a very sort of a fundamental concept in graphics. It is a kind of a translation, yeah. This is a transformation, in other words, a rotation. That idea of starting at one thing and over a number of steps ending up at another thing is called what?
Tween.
Tween. It possibly is a tween. That's an animation thing. Yeah, there's a generic term for that.
Interpolate.
Interpolation. Very good. So we have an issue, right? If I'm suddenly looking at, we'll say you're kind of pointing, well, we'll say, you know, you want to do these sequence here and you want to step through all the things, even if you're doing 180 degree pitch, eventually, you know, you're going to reach straight up, you know, or you're going to have to go back past the 0 degree rotation and you're going to have to start going to minus rotation. So interpolation between two rotations, using this sort of system of notating orientations is practically impossible. Or if it's not impossible, it requires lots and lots and lots of, well, not CPU, it requires lots and lots and lots of code, lots of if statements, you know. If I'm rotating beyond the 0 degree thing, then I need to start going backwards, or I need to start subtracting 2 pi from it, and then it gets really, really tricky if you've got loads of rotations that you need to do. So we've got two big problems. Number one problem is lots of different representations for the same orientation. Number two is the problem of interpolation. There is another problem which we're going to spend maybe an hour working on next week, and it's a problem called Gimbal Lock. But I need diagrams, and I need to show you some videos to explain what Gimbal Lock is. Gimbal Lock is, the sort of technical definition for Gimbal Lock is when two axes line up, you lose a degree of freedom. And you really need to see this visually, so I'll show you a video next week that illustrates the problem of Gimbal Lock. Gimbal Lock is an interesting problem because it not only applies in computer games, but it also applies in rocket ships. So the whole NASA space program up until the end of the 60s, even the spaceships that landed on the moon, didn't use quaternions to represent the rotation or the orientation of, let's say, the moon lander, you know, the Apollo moon landers. They used fixed axis rotations, or rotations around axes. And so there was actually a light on the console, which was the Gimbal Lock light. There's no technical reason why something can't rotate in any direction whatsoever, but the computer couldn't handle rotations past, you know, 0 degrees, or basically any situation where two axes lined up. You get this Gimbal Lock situation, and I really need to show you a video of it because you can't really explain it. But there's no technical reason why it couldn't have been done. It just, the computer couldn't handle it. But Quaternions avoid this problem of Gimbal Lock completely. It just doesn't happen with Quaternions. So anyway, these are one way. Is there any other way we could represent the orientation of an object? And you already know one other way of representing the rotation of an object.
Degrees.
What's that?
Degrees.
Degrees, yeah, but this has to be degrees around an axis. So this is degrees. This is like rotating around an axis, yeah?
Rotates my camera.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Or thinking about the orientation of something. I mean, like this. I really should have brought my damn spaceship. I might even pause the video and go back and get my book writer's spaceship. You know, when you look at that, if that was actually happening in a real physical game, it's rotating continuously, you know, and it can rotate to any orientation. We need a way to represent that, and we need a way to integrate it. In other words, we need to calculate the new rotation with respect to time. Huh? What's that? A matrix, of course. A matrix. A matrix is another way. What's a matrix? For us, a rotation is a 4x4 matrix. So in fact, the rotation bit can be represented in 3x3. But even with the matrix, we still have that problem of interpolating between two orientations. You know, as the thing is spinning, it's going to need to calculate what was my previous one, what was my next one. I'm going to rotate a little bit more in that general direction. That's really difficult to do with matrices. But in fact, it's very easy to do with Quaternions. It's a very simple algorithm to rotate a Quaternion and to calculate the intermediate Quaternion between two other Quaternions. Anyway, so we've got fixed axis rotations, matrices, yaw, pitch and roll, all of this kind of stuff. They're all ways of solving this problem. They all have problems with interpolation, and they have problems with equality, checking to see if two things are orientated in the same way. And Quaternions basically solve this, right? But how do they work? We don't know. It's a mystery. It's a mystery to me. I don't know anyway. And you know what? It's not important. All you do is you learn off the rules and the mathematics for Quaternions. But The actual depth of why a quaternion works is beyond the scope of this class. I have a fantastic book at home, Quaternion Rotation Sequences, which someone can borrow if you want it. So anyway, next thing about quaternions, just to move it along a little bit, and we're talking about the idea of a quaternion being like a four-dimensional vector. Okay, the next thing we can say about a quaternion is that in order to represent a rotation, the quaternion must be a normalized quaternion. Okay, what's a normalized quaternion? How do we normalize a vector? You divide by the length of the vector. How do you calculate the length of a vector? The square root of length of a vector is just
The square root of the square of the sum of it.
exactly. So you get each of the x, y, z components, you square them, sum them, and you get the square root of it. That gives you the length of a vector. All right. The quaternion length. Excuse me. The quaternion length. I'll have to edit that bit out. Quaternion length is the same. So it's the square root of x squared plus y squared plus z squared plus w squared, and you get the square root of it. And that gives you the length of a quaternion. Obviously, this being, programming and stuff like that, you can just do q dot length to go and calculate it, and it will calculate the length of the quaternion for you. All right. So quaternions, because it's just x, y, z, and w, they can have any values, can't they? You can put 1,000,000 into each of the components, but then it's not a normalized quaternion anymore. Sure, it's not. So for this course, and for rotations in 3D, we only deal with normalized quaternions, and sometimes we have to renormalize the quaternion to make sure that it's constantly normalized. At some stage, you need to take your quaternion and make a matrix out of it so you can do the world transformation. And if your quaternion is not normalized and you make a matrix from it, you end up with a matrix which doesn't rotate, but which may scale the object or do something else weird to the object. So it must be normalized. Alright, so that's step 2 of the poem. Has to be normalized. To normalize, you just take the x divided by the length, the y divided by the length, the z divided by the length, and the w divided by the length. Or in code, you just go q dot normalize. Q dot normalize. That normalizes the quaternion. Basically just calculates the length, divides each element by the length. So,
Sorry, x over L, y over L, z over L.
yeah.
They're all being added together?
No, that's just to get the x component, the y component, the z component, and the w component. You take its existing value, you divide by the length. In the same way we normalize a vector, that's what normalizing a vector is. Just divides the x component by the length, the y component by the length, the z component by the length. The next 2 lines go together. And this is the key to why quaternions work. Alright? In fact, there is another little step which we probably should talk about first, but it's a little bit further along in the poem. So let's just do the bit that's slightly further along in the poem. And the bit that's slightly further along the poem is how do you make a quaternion in the first place? How do you make a quaternion? So you make a quaternion with the following. Now, when I say this, this is the theory, and then in the practice, of course, you use quaternion.create from an API, right? But what actually happens is this. Yeah. Q.W, and you will need to write code to do this as well, so it's important to know how the quaternion is constructed. The W component of the quaternion is made from the cosine of the angle of rotation over 2. So that's the W component of the quaternion. Q dot X is equal to the axis of rotation multiplied by the sine of the angle of rotation over 2. Q dot Y is equal to the axis dot Y multiplied by sine of the angle over 2. And Q dot Z is equal to axis dot Z multiplied by the sine of theta over 2. Okay, so that's the theory of where a quaternion comes from. So, a quaternion is made from an axis of rotation and an angle of rotation. So, when you know what axis you're rotating around and what angle you're rotating, you could make a quaternion like this. You can code this yourself, but there is an API. You can go Q equals quaternion, and there's a static member on it that create from axis angle, and that will construct it for you using this algorithm here, and that makes the x, y, and z and w components of the quaternion for you. So then once you have a quaternion, you now have something that represents an orientation. Okay, so that's how you make a quaternion. So that's, do I say that? Second line, yeah. So to construct one, you use an axis and an angle. So you take the axis of rotation, the angle of rotation, and that's how you make a quaternion. Now, that's cool. We now have a quaternion. How do you use it? You use it using this equation here. Say you want to take a vector, any old vector, and you want to rotate it around the origin by a quaternion. So you have a quaternion that maybe represents 90-degree yaw or 180-degree pitch or whatever, and you now want to rotate a vector by that quaternion. You use this equation here. V, which is the vector, is equals to Q times W times the inverse of Q, and that's the equation. So we've got a couple of things going on here, right? First thing, this dot here is quaternion multiplication. And quaternion multiplication, we did the cross product of two vectors, didn't we, last week, to calculate the right vector? So quaternion multiplication is very similar to the cross product of two vectors. It would take me half the board to go and write it up. Okay, or maybe I will just write one element of it, just so as you know that it's, you know, it's how it works. But you never need to do it. You use the API to multiply quaternions, but it's basically a whole load of multiplications and additions of the x, y, and z's and w components, and you end up with the x component coming out. I'll show you just one of them, you know. To get the w component, you basically take q1 dot w, q2 dot w, minus q1x dotted with q2x, minus q1y, q2y, minus q1z, q2z. Now I didn't work all this out. This is stuff that Hamilton worked out 150 years ago. There's four of these. There's one for the w, one for the x, one for the y, and one for the z. And they're all similar combinations of multiplying different elements together, dividing elements together, and adding them and subtracting them. Sorry, multiplying and adding and subtracting different elements of the two vectors you want to multiply together, and then you get this one out the other end. So it's kind of like the cross product. But you know what? Every single quaternion maths library makes use of operator overloading. So you just go q multiplied by w, and it will multiply them. Is that okay? So it's something similar to the cross product. You don't need to know the details of it. The next thing then is what's w? Well, q is the quaternion that you're rotating, right? W is what's called a pure quaternion made from the vector. So W equals the pure Q made from the vector V. So if I wanted to rotate V, I make what's called a pure quaternion from it. So you take the X, Y, and Z. So we'll just say W dot X is equal to V dot X. W dot Y is equals to V dot Y. And W dot Z is equals to V dot Z. So that's where you get the components. And then of course you have the W dot W component. You know, because you've got a W component of that thing. W dot W is equals to 0. So you set the W component equals to 0. And that's how you make a pure quaternion from the vector V. You just take the X, Y, and Z, assign it to be the quaternion X, Y, and Z, take the W, you set it to be 0. Is that okay? Now we're going to do actual examples of this. I'll code all this up in C# so you can see, but I'll just maybe explain the concepts first. The Q minus 1 is the inverse of the quaternion, and the inverse of quaternion you get from the poem. To invert a normal quaternion, you just negate the X, Y, and Z components. So you take the X, Y, and Z components of your quaternion, you just make X equals to minus X, Y equals to minus Y, Z equals to minus Z, and that's the negated quaternion. And guess what? If you multiply this thing out, and you take the X, Y, and Z component of the output, it will have had the effect of rotating the original vector by the Quaternion cube. Do you believe me? Don't believe me, we'll code it up and we'll prove that it works. We've got to write it in C#, right? And we'll actually prove that it works. We'll set up a Quaternion like this, we'll multiply them out. It will either work, in which case Hamilton was right. It won't work, in which case maths is wrong. So it's either one of those two options, right? Now, the last thing then is to convert a quaternion to a matrix. So there is an algorithm for converting a quaternion to a matrix. I don't know what it is. You can look it up if you really wanted to implement it yourself, but you can basically go matrix dot create something like create from quaternion or create rotation, and you pass in the quaternion and it'll make you a matrix, which is the same thing. You need a matrix. You need a matrix because the world transform is a matrix. So even if you have a quaternion representation of the orientation, at some point you need to take that matrix, take that quaternion, make it into a matrix so that you can make it part of the world transform for the object. And that's all that's pretty much it for quaternions. You know, there's a whole other section on this which we'll work on next week, which is basically being able to do the forward Hamiltonian integrator. In other words, take the quaternion and show how applying forces cause an object to rotate. You know, so far we're just applying force at the center of mass of the object, which is going to cause it to move. But you think of how things happen, you know, things move in the real world. It's possible to take this object here, you know, and apply certain forces to it which cause the object to rotate, but its center of mass stays the same. You know what I mean? And that's the real world. So in order to implement a real physics engine, you need to have ways of doing that. And when you apply a force that causes an object to rotate but not move, it's called torque. It's called torque. Alright? So that's it for quaternions. Is everyone okay with that? Should we go and write some code? I'm going to write some code. Okay? The other thing that I really want to check is, I'm pretty sure that quaternion equality holds. In other words, if you make two quaternions, but you make them with different axes and different rotations, and you check to see if they're equal, even if they're made in different ways, the equality thing should work. So, you know, two or three rotations applied to give the same end result, as something which is just one rotation, should end up with equal quaternions. The equality thing should hold. And sorry, one thing which nobody has asked, or which I forgot to say as well, is combining quaternions. Oh, of course it's quaternion slurp. We haven't even talked about that. Let's write some code first. Combining quaternions. Off the top of your head, without even having seen anything, how would we combine two quaternions? Rotate by this, and then rotate by this one. Any ideas?
Add on.
Good guess, good guess. How do we combine matrix operations? Multiply them. How do we combine quaternion operations? Multiplying two quaternions together is the same as rotating by one quaternion and then rotating by the other quaternion. The other thing is that there is a quaternion slurping algorithm which allows you to interpolate between two quaternions, and we'll certainly make use of that in the lab next week. But for now, let's write some quaternion code to do something. Okay, so I have a basic little C# program here. This is a C# console app, but I've imported the XNA reference so I can make use of vectors and quaternions and do all the maths and stuff. Anyway, here's a vector V, and let's just give this vector a value, alright? Let's say that this is the vector. We'll give it some easy one that we can work out. So on the X it's going to be 0, on the Y it's 0, and on the Z it's -5. Everybody know where that vector is. 5 units ahead of us. Alright, because the negative z-axis is going in this direction. Is that alright with everybody? Okay, let's do some things first of all. Let's make a quaternion the hard way. Quaternion Q equals new quaternion. I'll just put a note here, making a quaternion the hard way. Let's say we want to do something pretty simple here. Let's say we want to do a 90-degree rotation around the x-axis. If I do a 90-degree rotation around the x-axis, it's going to change that vector to be what? Hello? Huh? If I rotate that 90 degrees around the x-axis, it becomes either 0 minus 50 or 0 50, depending on which direction the rotation goes. Everybody clear on that? Here's the origin. Here's x. I'm rotating either down to there or I'm rotating back up to here. Is that alright with everybody? So let's make a quaternion using the kind of long-winded way of doing it. So first of all, I say there's my quaternion. Q dot W is equal to the math dot cosine, and the value is theta over 2. So let's actually declare theta. Theta, 90 degrees in radians is what? Pi over 2, isn't it? There's my theta. So it's going to be the cosine of, now what's wrong with you? This is going to be a float double thing. Okay, so it's the cosine of theta. And then Q dot X, we said was, let's declare a variable here for the axis. Factor 3 axis. So the x-axis is what? The x-axis, the axis is 0, 1, 0. Hello? I know it's Friday. The x-axis. How do I specify the x-axis? The vector which represents the x-axis. 1, 0, 0. Thank you. So that's the axis. And there is the... Now, what's wrong with that? Oh, sorry, it's W. Thank you. Yeah. Good man. Thanks, Stephen. Alright, so I said that this was equals to the axis x multiplied by the sine of theta over 2. And that's actually the cosine of theta divided by 2.0f. And then this is maths.sine is actually axis.x multiplied by math.sine of theta divided by 2.0f. And then the x, the y, and the w all the same. And we get all this. That's a float, and that's going to give me back a double, so I need to cast that. And the same with these guys, need to cast these. So there's axis x, axis y, axis z. Now, what's the problem?
Q dot Z, you got Q dot Z.
X, Y, Z, yep.
The flight needs to be returned to the map.
Oh, you're quite right, yeah. Yep, there we go. So that's my quaternion made in that way. Okay, so when we want to rotate a vector by quaternion, we need a vector called W. So our quaternion called W, which is made from the x, y, and z components of the vector, with the W component equals to 0. So that's quaternion W equals new quaternion. Alright, and then w dot w is going to be equals to 0. The w dot x is going to be equals to the vector x. The w dot y is equals to the vector y. And the w dot z is equals to the vector z. Okay, and then finally we have another third quaternion, which is the quaternion inverse. I'm going to call it QINV. So QINV dot x is going to be equals to, what did we say we did to make the inverse of the quaternion? It's on the board. Negate the x, y, and z at the original quaternion. So it's just going to be q dot x, and we minus that. Q dot y, q dot z. So that's equal to minus q dot y, minus q dot z. And then finally, I can go quaternion out is, I call it output. Let's call it, what do we call it? V rot. Okay, for the V vector rotation is equals to Q multiplied by W multiplied by Q by NV. And then let's do a console dot read line. Alright, after all that work, I should be able to press F9 there. And rot, the x, y, and z components should be the same as that vector rotated around that quaternion which we made from the axis and the angle. So we're hoping that after all of that hard work we should get the vector 5, 0, 0 out the other end. And if it has worked, it will be a good day. Let's try it. So we're looking at V rot. It's not the right value. It is in fact 2.5, 2.5. So we got to look back again and see what we've done wrong here, okay? So live coding. So this is 0, 0, minus 5. Okay, theta is equals to math.pi over 2. That looks okay. The axis of rotation is 1, 0, 0, which is the x-axis. That's right, isn't it? Quaternion Q is equals to, the W component is equals to math.cosine of theta over 2.
Theta should not be divided by 2.
For the cosine?
Because it is divided by 2 twice.
Where is it divided by 2 twice?
When you declare it and you do q dot w equals math dot cos theta divided by
Your float theta is pi over 2.
Yeah, but that's 90 degrees.
Oh.
Math.pi divided by 2.0f. The x component is equal to axis x, y is equal to axis y, z is equal to axis z. So sine of theta over 2, cosine, sine of theta over 2. So pi over 2 is 90 degrees, isn't it? Pi is 180 degrees, pi over 2 is 90 degrees. So there's my w component, the w is equal to that, the x, y, and z. X is equal to that, the y is equal to that, the z is equal to that. Quaternion inverse. What's that?
You set W on inverse here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's probably it. QINV.w is equals to Q.w. Alright, let's try that again. Wow, look at that. V rho is equals to 0, 5, and 0. It worked. Hamilton was right. I'm so relieved. Huh? Impressed? Don't say it too enthusiastic. Okay, so the basic principle here is we know because we've written a program that the maths actually works. You can rotate things by using quaternions, right? So there's a little bit more to this. Let's change this around so that instead of making it the hard way, we make it the easy way. This is making the quaternion the hard way. Let's just use the API. Oh, for the crack, let's actually make another one here. So that was quaternion Q. That was making the quaternion the hard way. Let me Control X, Control V. Because you don't often need to do the thing that way. You can just use the API to make it, right? You can go Q, let's go Quaternion. New Quaternion, so we'll make another one. And then this time we'll go Q cube. In fact, let's do it like this. Equals, instead of going equals new Quaternion, we use the static method on the Quaternion class. Create from axis angle. So this time the axis is equal to the axis that we previously created, and the angle is equal to the variable theta. Okay, so Q and Q should be equal. You know, I've just verified that that API call does exactly what I've just done manually up there. So if I hit F9, hit F5. Okay, so that's still running, so let me hit F5 again. So Q and QQ should be basically equal. So Q is 0.7, 0 and 0.7, X, Y, Z, so, and then the QQ, oh yeah, because I've called it F10. So it's the same, alright, so basically that API call is just doing what we just did manually. I think it'd be interesting to do a little Quaternion equality experiment, wouldn't it? To try and make two Quaternions, or try and combine a couple of Quaternions to do the same thing. Let's pick that rotation that we worked on at the start. What was the rotation that we looked at the start? First of all, we said 180 degree yaw. Alright, let's make a Quaternion from 180 degree yaw. Okay? So I'm going to call this yaw 180 equals Q18 Quaternion dot create from axis angle. So 180 degrees is going to be the same axis, and then this time it's going to be math dot pi. Isn't that right? Math dot pi being 180 degrees. So that's that one. Now, what's wrong with you?
Double flow.
Possibly. Okay, and math dot pi is probably a double, right? So let's do the cast thing there. Okay, so that's that one. And then we said that what's wrong with you now? Come on, computer. Axis angle. Create from axis angle.
Maybe you just build it again and it goes away. Just,
oh, maybe that's what it is, yeah. Okay. Cool, and it's build succeeded. Alright. Right, we're going to do this. What did we say it was equivalent to? 180 degrees was equivalent to... Hey, Paul, thanks. We'll just do this last little thing. We said the 180 degree rotation, the Quaternion was equivalent to... the yaw, it was equivalent to... What did we say, Stephen? 180 on the pitch, and then 180 on the roll, isn't it? Let's try that, right? So the axis this time is going to be... Because it's 180 degrees on the pitch, it's going to be the... sorry, the first one is the wrong axis, isn't it? Because it should be the vector 3. So this is going to be 0, 1, 0 for the y-axis, isn't that right? Okay, and then this one is going to be new vector 3. This needs to be the x-axis, which is going to be 1, 0, 0, comma, math dot pi. And we probably need to do a cast for that. Even though I'm not sure if we need to do a cast for it. Okay, so that's the first one. And we want to multiply that by another Quaternion, which we're going to make. We're going to do the roll thing. So the roll thing is the vector 0, 0, and either 1 or minus 1. I don't think it makes a difference. Because it's 180 degrees, so it shouldn't make a difference. and then a math.pi thing there. Now this may not work because I've never coded this up before, right? But let's just do this. If yaw 180 is equals to test q that's all our right line. Not the same. Alright. So this is really quickly hacked together, so it may not actually, there could be errors in it in the same way. Does anyone spot any obvious errors as I was typing that up? Let's try it and see does it work, right? Let's set a breakpoint there. I have a suspicion this is just a bit too hacked together to work. I suspect it's not going to work, but we'll see. Not the same. So I think there's something we've maybe got to look at here. And it could be, if we have a look at them, that's 0, 1, 0, and the W is minus 4.7, and that is 4, 1, yeah, so they're completely different. Okay, need to come back to that one, right? I mean, I just hacked that together in a few minutes, so we need to look at that one again, but they should be the same, theoretically. But we'll come back to that one, okay? It was rather short. Should we take a little 5-minute break, and then Paul is going to give you a little bit of a presentation on the Mars rover. Okay?